For our final panel, we're going to talk about industry. I think one of the interesting things that's gone on all day is that we keep on referring to the manufacturers. We keep on referring to innovation. We keep on talking about what they should do and so forth. And I want to kind of use this time to sort of distill or consolidate some of our observations and get some good reactions, we hope, on basically redefining the role of industry in this situation. John, I know you've been introduced. Bo, tell us a little bit about the Community Oncology Alliance and why you even care about the industry.
Okay, very good question. Been with Co now for a couple years, actually 2.5. Came from an oncology practice in Eastern North Carolina. What we're learning, and what we're trying to learn from each other, is that we've really got to drive the message about the quality and the value component throughout all the stakeholders. Everybody in this room gets it because they're here, or most folks get it because they're here. A lot of folks don't. A lot of the providers don't. A lot of the payers don't. Certainly the patients don't. So we kind of help promote this message about the components of value, quality, and outcomes in cancer care. And then also take that message back to your organizations to say, no longer come out with a product that says, here it is, and it does X number of months. And by the way, look at the value quality component with the products that you have. It's interesting that we had a lab company come to us. We're working with the Oncology Medical Home model and working with Dr. Fox and a multi-stakeholder group trying to push some of these initiatives. And they said, Bo, I got this great idea. Here's how our new product fits into your 19 quality value measures. And I'm like, what a great idea. It's not just about quality, it's about the value side of things. So that's part of it.
But Bo, the conversation that you're having with them, isn't it kind of late at that point? Didn't you wish you might have had it when they were a little further up the pipeline?
Certainly, absolutely. But yeah, it's interesting because I go to a lot of state society meetings and conferences, and we're talking about you need to do this oncology medical home as Dr. Fox has done up in Michigan. And they go, okay, on Monday I'll be in oncology medical home. That's my Monday project. And they don't get it. We come back 6 months later and the head starts to tilt a little bit. I'm like, oh, this is a process. This is not an event. This is evolutionary. I've got to change the way I do business. A lot of it's already out the bag, but from this point moving forward, we got to change the thought process for all the stakeholders involved.
Okay, fair enough.
I would have never guessed. Eastern North Carolina.
You get it? Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, look real hard. You can see red neck right there.
All right. So John, speaking not only on behalf of Priority, but payers more broadly and reflecting on what you've heard thus far, is there a set of messages or signals that, let's say, the life sciences industry and oncology ought to be getting at this point? What would you like to have conveyed to them during this process? Or what do you intend to convey?
Yeah. You know, in my role as a medical director at a health plan, I have to go to provider groups, and I sometimes feel like a pharma sales representative because the providers look at me just as a payer. I would like to add something of value to be a preferred partner with them, and I think that's the same role that pharma is in today. They would like to add something of value above and beyond their drug that makes me want to enter into a preferred relationship with them. And the challenge is that beyond their drug, there's not a lot that at least they've offered so far that has value to me. We talked earlier.
There's not a lot that they've offered so far that has value to you.
But I want to give you some examples. There are a number of manufacturers. ASI is one who's developed a patient navigation tool or nurse navigator tool that's non-product specific and that's helpful in helping patients understand their condition, whether it be metastatic cancer or non-metastatic cancer. Those are helpful, and I think some Genentech has a survival program or survivorship program that's very interesting that are non-product specific. So I think there are some value adds, but I think the question is whether or not any of those will earn a more esteemed place at the table, and I'm not sure that they will. I think what will earn a more favored place at the table is when there's that shared risk that the earlier discussants alluded to, one in which there is mutual accountability for making sure the right patients are on the right therapy. Today, the risk is ours alone. As a payer, pharma really doesn't have any skin in the game in ensuring that the right patients are on the right drug. So as we talk with providers about transitioning from pay for volume to pay for outcome. What would that look like in this space? What would it look like in a relationship between a payer, whether it be an ACO or a health plan or anything in between, where there is a pay for outcomes? So if the drug that this patient was on didn't deliver the desired outcome, what would be the shared accountability or the shared risk for that?
Okay, but that's very helpful. I want to make it a little bit more specific. If I'm in drug development, I manage my company's pipeline. Are you telling me then that I should have certain thresholds or targets for health outcomes improvement or cost savings or cost offsets? As I'm developing my product and thinking about clinical trials, should I be thinking about that, or should I? You're not so interested in talking.
Yeah, well, when Scott was talking earlier, where he said, should there be a minimum threshold for improvement?
That's where it comes from.
That would be ideal as a starting point to say we're not going to bring anything to market that's a bunt single. Right. We want to bring a double to market or a home run, but if it's going to be a bunt single, I don't want that. But at the same time, we recognize that oftentimes you don't know until you complete the phase 3 clinical trials what that advantage is going to be, and in that case, there have to be cost considerations as well as outcomes.
Okay, and you said phase 3, but I think a lot of folks realize that a lot of these don't even get to phase 3, but
Sure.
they do get on the market, so you might not even get those data, right? Bo, what about that?
I think all the above. We need a comprehensive view of anything you bring to market. And to Dr. Fox's point, we have a team too of practice administrators, and part of the struggle is how affordable is it for practices to make this transition, to think differently and to behave differently. So we're trying to inventory and collect all these tools that he just mentioned to put them available to help practices make some of this thought process change. Some of these have to retool their practice. You know, the thing about healthcare has been totally about utilization. It's about you come in, you consume, you get a bill. There's been no accountability. And we're saying, no, think differently about everything you do. Think about quality, think about value, prove it. I had a colleague when I was at a practice. He was in the western part of the state, and I was in the eastern part of the state. We were similar in practice dynamics. We'd argue all the time. My practice is better than your practice. We couldn't prove it. We've got to be in the position of proving to each other, and we need our partners out there to help push those concepts about improving quality and value, and also get behind these initiatives that can help move the curves for cost reduction and efficiencies and value and quality to help promote some of these concepts.
You know, it's interesting because I think we focus too much on what drug is going to be the best for this condition, and not recognizing that there are a whole host of factors that affect patients' ability to take the drug as prescribed, and let alone a practice to ensure that it's optimally managing a patient so that the patient doesn't have delays in therapy, so they don't have dose reductions. And I think we probably get more, this is just for the oncologists in the room, I don't mean to insult you, but I wonder if we get more bang for the buck, more bang for patient outcomes, patient relevant outcomes, by improving the consistency and reliability of care delivery than we do by having yet an nth drug that provides 2 months of survival.
But the companies, life sciences companies, have been oriented over the decades, many decades, toward getting some kind of, regulatory approval based on certain biomarkers or some certain endpoints. Have they been in the business of adherence and medication management and whether or not your drug reduces readmissions? These are kind of a more outer concentric circle, if you will, of objectives. Are they tooled up to do that, Bo?
No, but they need to be. Just because we're also asking the practices to gear up for that, we're asking the payers to gear up for that. We need everybody gearing up for that. That's how we need to be. It sort of needs to look like the Angie's List of healthcare. You know, what is the quality and the value component here?
Okay. John, do you think this might change the nature of the life sciences industry? I mean, if they're just cranking out molecules, some that you can swallow, some that have to be injected, is that still a viable long-term approach given the healthcare demand and the things for which you intend to pay?
Yeah. Well, ultimately, what we'd like to pay for is enhanced outcomes, and if we have a very monolithic approach to this, or the manufacturers do, my only job is to produce a drug. It's everybody else's job to make sure that patients take it and to get the best possible outcomes. Then that's not a partnership. That's not mutual accountability. And yet, how do we define what mutual accountability looks like? If you look at the MS industry, almost every MS manufacturer has a patient support program that goes beyond just making sure patients take their medications. How would that look like in the oncology space, especially if you've got multi-drug therapy? That's complicated. And it also interposes yet another party in that physician-patient relationship. But the simple point of the matter is that I think pharma has to be more than simply a manufacturer of drug.
Okay, and with that, instead of asking for a question, I want to ask, who's in the pharma industry? Come on. Okay, which one of you wants a microphone right now? No, I want to know are you hearing something that's making sense to you? Raise your hand. Okay. These guys are trying to give you some signals about what they'd like you to look like sometime. Are you hearing this, or is this absolutely impractical? Name and affiliation.
I'm Raleigh Greer. I'm with Insight. And actually, what's been talked about all day is it needs to be a uniform, structured approach with all key stakeholders, with not just a risk-reward, but what's that incremental positive for achieving those outcomes? How can you move it from a penalty or a rebate kind of structure to a incremental reward? Reward for performance defined across the continuum. So it goes back to the FDA. What's required for the filing, what data is required, how can you prove success? And until you get to what actually constitutes a positive outcome, I mean, to one individual, incremental benefit may be a huge benefit depending on the individual.
Yeah.
So I think it makes sense, but you have to have aligned definitions. You have to have aligned protocol. And it's really, if you think about it from a technology standpoint, you have to have that sheet laid out, and everybody has to agree what all those cells mean. What does success like? When do you abort a clinical trial? I mean, there are costs involved in all of that drive the structure. When do you mitigate treatment of a patient and try to ensure they move out of that active arm? I mean, there's no easy, simple answer, and you have to go back, and we've not talked about the integrated delivery system or lack thereof. It comes down to how do you integrate everything, which is a huge thing. Look at systems now that don't have technology that relate to each other.
Yeah.
Look at payers that have acquired other payers where their systems don't talk to each other. So it's a very fragmented marketplace. And again, if you look macro, pharma is a very small piece of the overall cost. It's growing rapidly, but you have to have that full alignment and agreement that these are all the necessary variables that have to be agreed to, measured to, and ultimately reported out to.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Awful lot there.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
You know, it's interesting.
Thank you.
You were
Thanks.
talking about the setting expectations for outcomes. I really like, and I can't remember who brought this up when Michael Porter was talking about patient-relevant outcomes. Was that you, Scott? Yeah. As payers, what we're most interested in is patient-relevant outcomes, and all too often we get stuck with this progression-free survival. And if you were to ask patients, and I have, and not as much as an oncologist would, but if you ask patients what's more important to you, living longer or just living longer without having to take chemotherapy,
Yes.
they want the longer overall survival. And yet, I feel for the oncologist not being able to tell patients if this is going to help patients live longer. So I think, and yet at the same time, the pharma industry is kind of like my 16-year-old son. He's going to do the minimal amount possible in order to satisfy me. And likewise, there's no incentive for manufacturers to do more than the minimal amount required by the FDA to get your drug on the market. And yet, does that produce the patient-relevant outcomes that are relevant to patients, to payers, providers? No. And likewise, we don't have the infrastructure. This is where pharma could help if there was a consortium that were willing to fund this, a consortium that created databases that would allow us to do the comparative effectiveness and research that Scott needs to have to stay gainfully employed.
By the way, one more comment. Oh, we have a microphone. Yes. Wait for the mic, please, and we'll get your name and affiliation quickly. And
I know I was going to get Tom back there.
We're good for another minute. Go ahead. Name and affiliation.
Minimum required. I work for Genentech. I'm
Name
one
and
of the medical
affili-
directors.
Your
Sorry?
name is?
Tom Morrow.
Thanks, Tom. Go ahead.
Genentech. Okay, so we spend roughly $6 billion a year trying to find, from bench science to patient, the best solution for a problem that has changed from what was available when I was in medical school, where we had 3 targeted therapies that revolved around the following question. do you want to see a priest, a rabbi, or a minister? Because that's all we could offer them.
Yeah.
Because everything else was poison. Now we're spending an enormous amount of time, an enormous amount of effort, and progression-free survival is sometimes the only thing we can control for. Because once they progress, they go on another chemotherapy. We can't control for what they go on to after that in order to get overall survival. We try for overall survival, but we can only do overall survival when we have control the patient over a period of time that they're willing to put themselves in our control.
But are you expecting to get paid if you haven't gone beyond PFS?
Progression-free survival is what the FDA sets as our goal.
Right, and they allow you
We
to
don't
go,
always set the goals.
and they allow you to get on the market, but I was wondering if you expect to get paid for that.
If we don't, then we don't produce drugs.
Okay. While you're up, question for you. Genentech's one of the most innovative companies, not just in the country, but around the world. High investment in R&D and so forth. Your industry was built on that. Do you need a more open door or better access to guys like Fox to kind of figure out what they seek ultimately when they make payment decisions, or you don't care about that yet?
We have a whole department that meets with people like Fox.
To find out?
Most of them are MDs and PharmDs. And we would love to work closer with the payers. But what we need from them is defined, really close definitions of what they want. And the problem is we need to know that 10 years before they want it, because that's how long it takes to produce a drug. And, you know, we saw a graph in there that, you know, drugs a number of years ago took, you know, a decade and a half, and then one drug took 3 years. Well, that's not the norm. It's still 10 years.
So, points well made, and thank you very much. He also reflected on something that you and I agreed on, which was we got to get the message to them not once they're on the market, but way before.
Yep. Yep.
John, any last word about how anxious you are to sit down with pharma and kind of hash this stuff out way in advance? You cool with that?
One of my favorite quotes is from Indira Gandhi, and she said, it's hard to shake hands with a clenched fist. And I don't think that we'll solve this problem without collaboration. And I think it's one, however, that has to be around shared accountability.
And declenched fists. Bo, last word on this? Close that loop.
I visited Dr. Fox early in the process because they did some really cool things, as Dr. Sprandia has done. And he shared something that I've always remembered. He just asked him how it's going with his multi-provider team. And I says, what's the magic sauce? And he says, trust. We've got to get to a point of trust that we're unclenching our fist. We're talking about quality and value early on. That's our focus on anything that we do. And whether that drug is 10 years out or whether it's going to be 3 years out or next year, look at not only the quality of the drug, but also the value that you bring. We've got to bring the cost of cancer care down while also raising the quality. That's what the patient is demanding. That's what payers are demanding. That's what CMS is demanding. That's what everybody wants. We've got to figure out how to make it happen. It's a process, not an event.
All right. First, thank you to our spontaneous, didn't mind being picked on people on the floor. Thank you very much. There was no warning. Appreciate your comments. And please join me in thanking Bo Gamble and John Fox.